You're listening to the Dungeons, Dragons, and Psychology Podcast. When this show started earlier this year, and I recorded my first few episodes, I had no idea that it was going to grow this much or get this far. And everything that I've learned over this last year, talking to people throughout the community and my friends, has been very inspiring, and the community that has grown around this show has become something that I'm very, very proud of. And so on today's episode, which is our season 1 finale, I've invited 3 of my friends back who you've heard on the show before, and we're going to discuss some of what's coming up and what they've liked about the last year. I'm Robert Walker, author of Session Zero, the DMG to writing great campaigns in any system, and this is my show where I teach collaborative storytellers how to create memorable campaigns using psychology. And stay tuned at the end of today's episode, because I do have a very special guest announcement for a bonus episode next month. Even though we're going to be on break, I'm still going to continue bringing you some bonus episodes and extra content over the next couple of holiday months. So let's meet our guests.
This is Nate Pohl. I'm the technical director for Boise State University Theater. I've been working in theater my whole adult life, and the telling of stories is sort of both trade and passion. I've been playing D&D for about 19 years, I think.
Hi there. My name is Joseph Henry. I'm an economist by training, but a wizard at heart. I've been playing since I was 16, rather learning D&D since I was 16, and joined this group some 11 years ago, I think.
Well, my name is Dustin Archer. I have been gaming for just over 25 years with Rob. Today, I'm most proud that I am Joseph Henry's arch nemesis.
Nate's my arch nemesis.
Wow, I don't know what I did to deserve that.
You know what you did.
How
Now
many
I hate you
betrayals
twice
are
as
we
much.
He wasn't even in that game.
All I hear about the old stories are, oh yes, first he was a traitor in the desert. Then there was this other time that he was also the traitor. Then there was the first game that I played in where you also betrayed us.
Awesome, you guys. Welcome to the show. This is our season 1 finale episode. Holy crap. I am so excited to have 3 of my closest gaming buddies all here at the table with me today. And we are going to be discussing a little bit about what's going to be coming up in season 2, reminiscing a little bit about season 1, and talking about some of our favorite game moments and giving you some ideas for making your own games better. So we'll do this in a little bit of a roundtable style, just everybody chit-chatting, and hopefully my cyclithids out there get some good content out of this and have something to look forward to as we move into season 2. So I'll tell you right off the bat, one of the biggest changes we're making as season 2 returns, which is going to be the first Sunday of the new year. We are implementing a new segment, which is going to be a host-read segment called Knowledge Checks. And what Knowledge Checks is they are going to be a review of the psychology literature and research that has been done on a topic related to our topic of conversation for the episode. So at the end of every episode, you're going to get to look at the psychology behind what it is we're talking about and really have a better understanding that you can take to your table with the use of psychology. But enough about that for now. Let's start chit-chatting, guys. First thing I want to ask you about, we had a successful season. It's been pretty amazing how many listeners we have. As of the recording of this episode, we are like 2 downloads shy of 4,500 downloads for season 1 so far, which is pretty freaking awesome. But I want to ask you each, you've all been on the show before. Can you tell me or share with the listeners one of your favorite or a couple of your favorite moments from season 1?
Yeah, absolutely. When I'm thinking back over all the episodes that we've done, there was definitely one episode that definitely stood out. And if memory serves, it was episode 17. It was talking about monsters who are not stupid, except those who have, maybe a low intelligence. And that was really fun because we were able to get into talking about, better ways to run monsters at the table as a GM and how to be necessarily clever rather than actually having to overstat or, just have higher numbers for the PCs to deal with. And there was a lot of fun dialogue and discussion there. And that's a subject subject that I think we could dive into and even explore certain typical monsters that maybe aren't played to their levels. So that was a lot of fun chatting about, and I think there's a lot of room to even touch base back on that topic in the future.
That's an excellent point. That was a fun episode because we did talk about a lot of the different ways that monsters we've typically played kind of stupidly could be played more creatively.
Like dragons.
Like dragons was probably the biggest example, yeah.
I think my favorite episode was, and I just listened to this, so I'm probably biased, but the one with Nate and Chris talking about how to end stories, particularly around the idea of really like enjoying a good sacrifice, like a good martyrdom, but also how that really needs to not be the only way your stories conclude. Because it does turn into kind of a tired meme after a while.
You do anything too much and it becomes a little passé.
Right, exactly. So finding different ways to wrap things up and otherwise find closure, I think, is a great idea.
I think, man, I struggle with this one too, frankly, because for the most part, I'm proud of all the episodes that have been put out through season 1. I do think one of the ones that I've had a lot of personal connection to and a lot of personal responses to is the psychology of character death, which was actually a bonus episode, but it seemed to touch people in a more intimate way because it gave them a space to sort of understand how impactful emotional moments in games have been to them. And I had a lot of people reach back out to me and say, hey, when you talked about this, it really reminded me of these moments in games. Like I didn't really understand why I was so emotional or why I was so tied to these characters. And I think that was really cool to kind of see the response, psychologically speaking, to that sort of topic and that conversation.
Okay. Actually, this is going kind of way back. It was one of the very early episodes. But I think one of the ones that was maybe the most helpful for me in thinking about running games, planning games, was one of the early episodes. I think it was you and Dustin, Rob, who were talking about plot hooks and sort of how to build them, how to craft them, how to think about them. And it clarified things. I mean, it was information that maybe a lot of it I sort of had, although some of it I think was fresh. But it clarified things in ways that I hadn't really thought about before. It sort of was a nice reframing of things that I already knew to really help me think about them in terms of how you create the mechanism by which you get players involved in the story.
Wonderful.
There's definitely some gold in those earlier episodes.
Yeah.
We touched on some of the big, obvious, important subjects that were a lot of fun, but I've gone back and listened to some of those early episodes a few times because there's a lot of really good stuff there.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I'm really looking forward to with season 2 is delving a little bit further into the psychology behind the topics that we're talking about. So not just having that roundtable conversation like we have had, but also sort of bookending that idea with here's what you need to know about the psychology of that concept and why it has so much of a profound effect around the table. So I am definitely looking forward to that. But I'm curious, the three of you, what sort of ideas do you have, other psychology topics or other RPG topics do you guys want to be a part of in season 2?
Oh, I'll go first. Incentives. I love the idea of setting up reward systems within a game to incentivize certain play styles, especially finding a reason or helping nudge someone along to play more support roles as opposed to trying to vie for the superstar kind of status at the table.
Thus spake the economist.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
This is my trade.
That's a good topic. I'd be interested in hearing and listening to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was thinking a little bit about, we've kind of touched around this. We've talked a lot about villains and how to tell good stories and how to establish, plot hooks that lead your party into that. I would like to explore the notion of societies that have chosen an evil course and put them at odds with the PCs. It's easy to be part of a good aligned society that's attacked by bandits or goblins or dragons, in the wilderness, and you got to defend that good aligned society against these various forces. I think it'd be more interesting to talk about the opposite, playing characters who are trying to struggle to survive in a society that is fundamentally against them. And this can take a lot of different forms of the way that the evil society is portrayed right? I mean, then they could be the leaders of the society might have the rest of the society held hostage, and they, to their whims, or maybe they've even deluded the rest of the society to thinking terrible ideas are actually the norm or expected or even needed to sustain the society, and having to fight both psychologically against the nature of what is the belief and is this accurate, and then how to actually deal with the day-to-day challenges presented by that kind of a world. I think that's a subject I'd like to really get into.
Mm-hmm.
Really, the key to an evil society is that they will take something that sounds noble or could be noble if it was implemented in a noble sort of way, and use that to further their own ends.
How much even more problematic would it be if most people in the society don't even know it's an evil society, and what they're actually contributing to is some horrendous, genocide, slavery, racism, a lot of different things could be taking place behind the scenes that the average member of the society isn't aware of.
I would dare say I think your paladin might have an issue with his detect evil picking up on systemic evil.
Well, sure, and that's part of why I wanted to dig into this subject, because it kind of depends on how you slate evil in a traditional way. Because there's a lot of functionaries, I think, in the real world, in bureaucratic societies that are arguably, from most Western perspectives anyway, evil societies, that they themselves would not be evil. They're just a cog in the wheel. The leaders may be, the goals may be malign in intention, but that doesn't mean every bureaucratic functionary would register with an evil alignment.
I mean, the other interesting thing is actually how detect evil has, I think, changed a little bit over the years. Yeah. I'd actually have to go back and look at the rules to see what they said originally, but I believe the origin of detect evil was identifying evil-aligned characters and items and monsters. But I believe that with Pathfinder, at least, they actually changed the rules on that so that it actually will identify as evil somebody who is currently in the middle of committing an evil act.
Or considering
what I was thinking of,
an evil act.
I don't believe it was considering. That sounds very Catholic.
You're remembering that from high school.
Well, maybe that's it too. No, I remember something about like the example being the paladin goes into the tavern and there's someone at the bar who's kind of keeping to themselves, but they keep eyeing someone that they're planning on stabbing, and that shows up as evil because they're considering, doing this terrible thing.
I will say, I believe planning is different than considering.
Okay, fair enough. You're semantics, but we're on the same page.
Intrusive thoughts versus premeditation is somewhat different.
Correct.
Yeah, that does make sense to me. Yeah, premeditation is definitely evil.
Well, they're not sure they're going to go through with it.
Yeah.
Okay, and just to kind of seed the water for that future episode, I think it's also important to draw a line between social preconceptions of evil and literally elemental evil is I'm sure there's going to be some degrees there,
like the primal evils.
Temple of elemental evil is very different than
Great
the
campaign,
evil
by the
of
way.
an unlawful traffic ticket.
Well, remember, traffic tickets are punishable by death.
Mere extortion.
Well, but that's the point. It's actively evil intent. You are setting out to commit the action. You're not just thinking about the action.
Intention is thinking about.
No, it's the difference between somebody thinking about blowing up a building or somebody actively planning the steps that it would require to blow up that same building.
I would argue someone who's seriously considering creating the steps, if they were detected evil on at that moment, they would show up as evil.
Listen, you are maybe on a continuum a little bit, and I get that maybe you could register a little bit of something at that point, but I think every random person who has ever thought about doing something bad would not necessarily detect as evil.
Well, that depends on if they're Catholic or not.
Well, and we don't necessarily want to kind of verge into thought crimes. That's
actually that would
Minority
be
Report.
exactly what an evil society, surveillance society. Heck, they could use telepathic abilities to determine your intent. I mean, and that's obviously for the well-being of the society because we want to purge the malign influences, right?
Well, Minority Report. Yeah. There are a lot of spells out there that are about trying to prophecy the future.
Yep, that's true.
Mm-hmm.
Oh God. You're not even detecting thoughts at that point. You're just going to read the future.
I love it. I love it.
Seems somehow unsporting.
That should be its own episode, a society that detects the future.
Hey, it is a common trope in fantasy and science fiction even sometimes. And I think could make some interesting stories.
Precognition.
Well,
Rob, I have to go back to this. Don't we have like 50 to 70 show ideas for season 2 already?
Oh, I do have a lot. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's what I thought.
No, I mean, there's listeners, there's no shortage of episode ideas. And I keep getting ideas from my cyclothids as well. Like, people have jumped on Instagram or on Twitter and they've said, hey, I would really love if you would talk about this topic. And there's been some really great ideas in there. So I do suggest, if you're listening and you have a great idea, send it in. Jump on Instagram or send me an email. I love to hear these kind of ideas, and several of the episodes of this season 1 were thrown in there because they were ideas that I got from listeners. And I think that is the best kind of way to create a podcast, because then I'm giving you the exact kind of content that you're looking for, and I really like that part. We've all been playing in the same game over the last few months. I'm kind of curious. I want to know, over the last year, recent games that we've played in, what are some of the best moments that you guys have had this year? And I think we've talked a lot about older games that we've been in and things that go a little bit further back. We've mentioned some of our current campaigns, but I'm really interested in hearing what you guys have found as like your most favorite parts of this year.
So I'll go first. I think there was a moment where in my Tolis campaign, when the party finally got the staff put back together that they needed to destroy an artifact, and I don't want to give too many spoilers if anyone's involved in a Tolis campaign, but this staff was incredibly powerful, and there was some conflict between the party of, should we use it? I mean, my gosh, look at all the benefits it could provide for us, versus, well, there's a major like plot thing we need to do with this that's important, but in the process we'll destroy this wonderful, powerful artifact staff. And gosh, should we just, hold on to it for a little while to deal with threats before us? And,
play the objective.
Yeah,
always.
and it was really, really fun to see the cogs turning in the various players and the conversations there. And I think that they made the right decision in the sense of, nope, let's get right to the plot. Let's deal with the threat before us. And I would have had some fun as a GM preventing that from taking place if the party had delayed too much. So it was probably the right call, but it was really, really fun to see that debate and see, my gosh, this would be great to keep around as an artifact to use for the party, but really, is it worth the risk? And having the party have to make those kind of moral decisions with all the, I mean, realistically, there was so many threats allayed before them that keeping a powerful artifact that would help them deal with those other threats would have been useful, but they had to decide what's the greater objective. And just watching that debate take place among the party and trying to figure out what they needed to do, and finally choosing the moral high ground, even though there was great personal cost involved with that in addition to losing the artifact, it's a lot of fun for me as a GM, probably the most memorable in the last year for sure.
It's the exact argument that a seal door fell on the wrong side of.
Yeah.
It's what gave us the Lord of the Rings.
That's right. Do I take the power for the good of my people, or do I destroy the artifact? Yeah, absolutely.
I really enjoyed being able to play out my pseudo paladin Vicreus out to a reasonable level. I think that one of the things that really comes up when you're spending a little bit too much time working out character ideas is you start craving the novelty of something that's like strange. And this ended up being a paladin that's not a paladin, but it came together really well. I got a great deal of pleasure out of playing a character who was essentially a paladin and was lawful good, but had no like oaths or like motivating reasons why he had to stay good. And essentially playing that out as a very effective, like defensive mage knight of sorts. And it was just really satisfying to get towards the end of that campaign and see it all come together in a way that actually supported the party and wasn't necessarily like problematic as some of the higher end builds can be.
Numbers. You enjoyed the
you
enjoyed the numbers.
I enjoyed
the cornucopia of abilities that you had at your disposal.
Completion.
I was shaking my head because there are no problematic characters. There's only problematic players.
Spoken like a problematic player.
Spoken as one who can identify problematic players at a distance.
Now you're putting me on the spot, because I think you're right. Every
character has a game that character is fit for. Literally every character.
Some of them might be by themselves.
Listen, it's entirely possible. But I think more what tends to be the problem is how they are played, not the numbers on the page.
Whether they're played, just to tag on to that, whether they're played in a collaborative way with the rest of the goals of the other PCs, or whether they're kind of going off on their own, doing their own thing, ignoring the story the GM is telling, ignoring the desires and goals of the other PCs, and just trying to achieve their own thing. And I think that comes down to how the character's built. I mean, realistically, I've always despised the notion of building characters in a void, separate from each other, and then all coming to the table. I mean, there's a place for that. The party meets in the tavern and stuff, and for some more casual games that may work, especially maybe with a newer group of players who's not used to playing with each other. But I think that we've talked about this in some of our session zero discussions, getting together as a larger group, figuring out what the nature of the game is, the various different roles people are going to take. So, Joe, you brought this up before. People haven't stepped on each other's toes. Minimize that as much as possible, increases everyone's enjoyment of the game. So I think that, if you go into that collaboratively, I think you're going to work well. But realistically speaking, there are players, I think, that go about that the opposite perspective, the antagonistic style.
But isn't that a problem of the players, not the character?
Hold on. Are you talking about us not stepping on toes in a game where we have 2 rogues and 2 druids?
That's a 7-player game, my friend. There's going to be toe steps. It happens.
It's about picking a slightly narrower lane.
Okay. All right.
That's true. I mean, we have had a game filled with only wizards.
I remember a game where we played, now admittedly, it was 3 player characters, but we played 3 Red Wizards of Thay. I mean, not only just wizards, but literally the same prestige class.
You did have different specializations.
That is true.
That is a very different level of wizard, to be fair.
Still.
You could do 3 fighters and still make them suitably diverse. You could have an entirely shield-based fighter, a 2-handed damage dealer, and then a ranged characters. You could build 3 of any character class very differently.
I think I don't even think they have to be built differently to have fun. You could do an entire party. Well, okay, maybe not an entire
3
party.
druids,
That might get a little
one
weird.
With a horse, 1 with a bear, 1 with a lion.
No. I was even. I was even going to go if you pick the same archetype. Like, let's say for Pathfinder, you do 3 fighters and you do 3 2-weapon fighters. There are teamwork feats and advantages and things you can do to make that synergize that you don't have to be stupidly diverse.
Sure.
I mean, you can work together as a team. God forbid.
About the
you might have
defensive
some
sides.
issues with traps.
Well, I was also thinking with will saves, but sure.
I'm not saying there's not problems. I'm saying that regardless of what you choose to do, you're going to end up facing issues. But if you do it collaboratively, teamwork tends to overcome that better than a particular character build.
D&D is a team sport.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, your fundamental argument, I think we all agree with, that there's only problematic players, and really that can be handled in an out-of-character context, particularly between the GM and that problematic player. Let's address the issues long before you get there. If a character wants to build, not to put this too close to home, the lawful evil character in a good-aligned game, that can be discussed in advance and make sure that that's done in a way that isn't stepping on too many toes or taking the game too far off of what the GM has intended.
Yeah, for sure. I think for me this year, what has been really interesting and probably what I have both enjoyed the most and despised the most.
Oh boy,
is learning how to play with a much larger table. Because this is something I never thought we would have a group of 7 players.
I have to give you kudos. I mean, coming out of my Tolis game with 7 players, and we talked all about the different ways to do it, but at the end of the day, we agreed it's important to spend time with our friends and everyone be at the table. I haven't had a chance to tell you, Rob, I've been very impressed with how you've really handled that, and I feel like it allows us, even when some people aren't able to come to the session, to continue to play and still move the story forward. And I don't feel like much has gotten left behind.
Yeah, and I think that's probably one of the biggest benefits that I've liked about it. One of my favorite parts about it is that we haven't really had weeks where we can't keep playing, which is great. Like if a few people can't show up, our group's big enough that the story can still keep going and we can still move forward. And I really like that part of it.
There's been a few things we've done that have made that work in particularly really, really well. You have your lovely wife as a GM assistant writing notes.
That has been very helpful.
That allows you to focus your attention on moving the story forward without forgetting all the details and the NPCs and the different things that go on. But also the players have been involved in keeping notes there too.
Yeah, that has helped. And I think something I would suggest to the DMs of the world out there, if you do have a big group, something that I've tried to do whenever the party splits is to deal with those splits in skill challenges instead of long roleplay sessions. I think it moves those times that the party's not together along a little bit faster, and it makes it a little bit more entertaining for everybody else who's not involved to sort of participate by watching kind of a show, you know? So I would suggest that. It's from 4th edition. If you haven't played with skill challenges, check them out. We incorporated them into basically all of our games because they are very useful tools.
I wasn't the largest fan of 4th edition, but there were some very interesting, there were a couple of pieces that I think were absolutely genius, and skill challenges are probably at the top of that list.
I agree. They're probably my favorite thing from 4th edition. And like I said, even when we've worked backwards and played in 3.5 or in Pathfinder 1st edition, we tend to keep skill challenges around just because they are such a useful tool for making silly little things like sneaking,
Or
through the alleys
scenes.
or chase scenes much more enjoyable.
We've used it for a lot of different things. And in the very recent session, we used it when we're trying to traverse a difficult mountain terrain, trying to get a wagon through this, and, all the issues on this mountain trail with all the mudslides and stuff. And getting through that could be a very tedious role play, but you came up with a way to do that allowed us to move through that in just a few minutes and move on to the next piece of the story, which was still very engaging. And it actually, I think we failed that skill challenge.
You did,
which made it actually kind of fun to slide down the hill with the wagon and have to try to figure out.
Slide down the hill?
Well,
Slip off a cliff.
Off the cliff.
Details.
Different.
That's a matter of degree. But no one died. Just
the
hold on.
horses.
There's been enough chatter here. We need to add a little bit of context just for anybody who's listening who isn't familiar with the idea. This is essentially a proxy for combat in like a non-aggressive way. So each person goes around the table naming a skill and trying to make a DC set by what they're suggesting. Like, I will use ride to try to navigate these horses around a tight mountain path. Would be like a reasonable use of the skill. If it's not applicable, this has a relatively higher DC. And this basically allows you to bring some of the like improv elements of what do you do in a situation back into a non-combat scenario.
And that's what I really like about it too, where everything's not hindering on a single check. So it's like make or break it. We can have scenarios like this mudslide that we were trying to traverse where the party genuinely failed the check and there were consequences, yet the story still gets to move forward. And I think that's one of the really beautiful things about the skill challenges. All right, Nate, brings us back to you again.
Nate doesn't enjoy moments. He enjoys the whole game.
Devours them.
Well, that is how I tend to consume most of my media. No, I think my favorite moment actually was very recently. In fact, I think maybe it was just last week. After that mudslide down the hill, we discovered a cave, and inside the cave was a dragon who we fought and ended up being a little bit more intelligent, surrendered to us, actually. And that was a little bit of a challenge in terms of what to do with the dragon who surrenders. But in actually 3rd edition, in the Book of Exalted Deeds, there's actually rules for how to convert evil. And I happen to actually really love those rules. And in the game, I'm playing a paladin. So we used those rules and sort of role played out what does it look like to convert a dragon. And I had a great deal of fun with that, helping the dragon atone for some of its past misdeeds and learning how to fit into a society in a much more healthy sort of way. And I had a great deal of fun with that role play.
That was a really fun session. I really enjoyed the scene where the dragon and Nate's paladin went to the farmer whose sheep the dragon had been feasting on for many years and had to negotiate recompense to the farmer and a contract going forward for how the farmer would be paid for his eaten sheep.
It was a great deal of fun.
Yeah.
It really was.
Very good times.
Merchant paladin, I might add.
He is. He's like a merchant paladin.
You definitely handled that according to the way he would have handled it.
Yeah,
Hey, absolutely.
I
I they're not all the characters I play, but I do like playing pro-social characters. I think it can be it lends itself to the group experience.
Ironically, when I think of all the characters you've ever played, a very antisocial character is the one that actually comes directly to mind, but that's neither here nor there.
I have played several of them over the years, there's no doubt.
Okay, guys, let's move on to tricks of the trade. End of season 1, and I thought the best tricks of the trade to give to you, my listeners, would be each of our number one piece of advice to either players or GMs to create better games, and use these pieces of advice over the next couple of months as we are on break between seasons. But also reach out, talk to us, anything you love about this, let us know. Any other ideas you have, let us know. I am going to be posting some more information and more bonus episodes that'll pop up in between now and then, and comments from the listeners that will be on Instagram and things like that. So if you have ideas of your own, send them our way, and I'm going to get them out there. I want to include you all in this conversation. So who would like to get started?
Honestly, if there's going to be a break, I think one of the best things the listeners can do is go back and listen to the earlier episodes they may have missed, or maybe the ones that they really liked. I actually have some. Well, that is obviously something that you should definitely do. I just want to touch on something we've talked about a lot, and that is that at the end of the day, this is a collaborative game. Yep. You have a group of people that are getting together that are devoting a large amount of time for a game that everybody needs to get something meaningful out of the experience, and I think that really comes back to communication, and you can't over-communicate. I mean, both before, during, and after game, I think keeping those lines of communication open, both between the players at the table, between the GM and all the players, to make sure everyone's getting out of the experience something close to what they're putting in, so it makes it worthwhile. There's nothing worse than playing a game for several months and then it devolving into nothing because certain people aren't enjoying it. They want to move on to different things because they're feeling like they're not being listened to, or they don't have a real place at the table. And that can easily be avoided just with good communication between everybody, and just to be open to those different thought processes. And everybody likes to play the game differently. I mean, Joe, you and I look at this from a very different perspective usually about what we enjoy out of the game, and that's totally fine and totally fair, but it's important that both of us get what we want out of the game and out of the experience. And I think most GMs are more than happy and more than able to do that if they know that's what we're looking for.
Very good advice, Dustin.
Asking for what you like. I like it. I think that the big tip that I'd like to give actually addresses character creation, because I know a lot of people who like to play a very high level of game, present company included.
He's talking about me.
And me.
And me.
Right. And so I would just really like to kind of encourage the thought of, after you've kind of like settled in on your general character concept, like a dispeller wizard or something, or a paladin who's not a paladin, for example, settling in on how to support the rest of the team as an immediate second priority, whether that's going to be some way of buffing skills, having healing and reserve, finding ways of boosting their defense or buffs so you can not just hold your own, but also tag along on their missions and be welcome, I think is a really important part of character creation, like before you ever sit down to roll dice, because really this is a team game, and however you can contribute to helping everybody else achieve their goals is going to turn you into a much more welcome player.
Yeah, I very much agree with that point.
I think my recommendation would be to look outside of your normal story consumption, I guess. If you tend to focus in on sort of the same style of storytelling, whatever format that might take, look outside of that. Go experience a different medium. If you read a lot, go watch a movie or see a play. Go listen to a podcast. Do something new, and you will probably find some form of that storytelling that resonates with you, and you can bring that back to the gaming table with you. Whether it's some new idea in terms of a storyline, some new idea to sort of incorporate as a method of storytelling at the table. The further outside of yourself you look, there's a wealth of sort of opportunity and possibility out there.
Yeah, it's a very good point too, Nate. And to that point, I think my DMing style lends a lot to what you're talking about right now. At any given time, saved on the note tab in my phone, I have 100 or more different quotes or sayings or things that I heard from different media that I want to put in my game. It's either like, this scene from this story was really cool, or literally a quote that a character said. And I mean, I've got a dozen of them that came from Yellowstone, which I was recently watching, of just really cool things that like a villain could say, or a good person trying to motivate, a clamoring party would be able to say. And I just sort of keep those things at hand as extra references for building a more believable, more immersive world.
No wonder your NPCs are so memorable.
Yeah, thank you. And to my point, I'm going to go ahead and say what's worked really well in this game is the advice that I'm going to give going forward. And I know sometimes it can kind of come off a little bit ridiculous, but just kind of let go. Be willing to be silly as a DM. if you give your players the idea that it's okay to be a little bit ridiculous and have a little bit more fun than just being serious, boy, we've had a lot of laughs in this most recent campaign. Honestly, I think we've been laughing around the table over ridiculous NPCs or stupid shop names or just like stuff that have been a little more off the wall that I'm used to doing. But I think it's come off really well, especially for a large group, is it kind of brings everybody back into the center when we're able to all laugh together. So I would say just be silly, have fun, and just enjoy yourself. Enjoy being free and being ridiculous a little bit more than you might be comfortable with.
Oh, yeah. And I got to say, by the way, Dispel and Datspell is pure gold for a magic shop name.
Thank you.
Oh, my God.
Run by Miss Giggle Willow.
That's right. That's exactly right. Like I'm playing a little more punny. I'm playing a little more ridiculous than I normally play because I tend to like pretty serious stories, but we're all there to have fun. So I've just been trying to let loose and have a little bit more fun. And I think it's worked well, especially with this group size.
Even dramas have need for comic relief occasionally, and it's nice to bring a little levity into the games, especially with more serious. The story you're telling has a lot of seriousness to it, so I've definitely enjoyed those moments of, she's named what?
Awesome. Any final thoughts before we go, gentlemen? The final sign-off for Season 1?
That's been great. I mean, I've enjoyed both participating and listening every week to the various episodes. I've enjoyed not only hearing perspectives from a lot of the people we game with on a regular basis, but also many of the guests you brought on have shared unique perspectives and diverse interests, and I've really enjoyed that aspect of the show as well. So I'm very excited to see where things go into Season 2.
You know, the more time we spend doing episodes like this and watching my wife get progressively more into stuff like Critical Role and other notable gaming troops leaves me with this kind of like quiet hope that we could like find ourselves all around a table with mics ready to be like recorded and maybe not televised, but podcasted. I don't know. It seems charming.
You know, there has been contemplations of such steps. I don't know if I'm ready to take the plunge yet. But the more I also listen to these kind of podcasts and the more that I get comfortable with this format, it's definitely been a topic rattling around in my brain.
Well, that means, Cyclithids, if that's something you want, please send him an email.
Yep, that's true. I mean, if you're looking for an actual play from our group, if you guys bug me enough, it probably will happen.
You know, I mean, hypothetically, a one-shot would be a lot easier to manage than like a whole campaign.
That is true.
Just
we could throw some one-shots out there and a few hours of gaming, and you could get a better grasp on the idea of the way that we play.
Not sure what final thought to leave you with other than have fun gaming.
And honestly, that's it. Have fun gaming. And last but not least, before signing off for this final time in Season 1, I do want to remind you, my Cyclithids, that you can get a hold of me by emailing me at dungeonsdragonpsychology, that's all one word, at gmail.com. You can also find me on Instagram, on Twitter, on Facebook, and you can go to the website dungeonsdragonpsychology.com, and you can communicate with me there. Very last thing, I do have a very special guest announcement that I'm super excited about. In 2 weeks, I'm going to be recording with Greg Tito and Shelley Manzanoble, the hosts of the official D&D podcast, Dragon Talk. They're going to be on the show talking about their new book, Welcome to Dragon Talk, inspiring conversations about Dungeons and Dragons and the people who love to play it, which is releasing in early December. Very excited about this, so please tune in early next month as this bonus episode featuring two of the most recognizable names in the D&D gaming industry are on my show. And just a huge thank you to all of my Cyclithids who have started listening to the show, who have shared it with their friends. Please keep getting the word out there. I'm very excited for Season 2. We're going to have a lot of changes and some great new guests coming on, and you'll be seeing those announcements in my Instagram and Twitter feeds over the next few months. And as always, until next time, we'll see you next session.